The only value of stock forecasters is to make fortune tellers look good. Warren Buffett.
Are you ready to make the most of the only life you have? To make smart money choices focused on achieving what you care about most? Here to help you balance living well today without sacrificing your tomorrow is the retirement answer man, Roger Whitney.
Mary, my grandmother, was born in 1919. She recently passed away a few years ago, well into her 90s. But that made her 10 years old when the great stock market crash of 1929 happened. And she was a young lady all through the Great Depression. Growing up with her, as my grandmother, I think that formed a lot of her decision-making for the rest of her life. When I got a hole in my jeans, we'd go to Grandma's house and she would iron on a patch. I can remember her singing while she was cutting out patterns with my sisters to sew dresses for them. Her and her husband Ziggy, my grandfather, when we would have Christmas, when they would unwrap paper, he'd pull out his pocket knife and they would cut the tape and then fold up the wrapping paper because they were going to use it for next year. That formed a lot of how they thought about the world of the Great Depression. And what I've noticed lately is, I think with many of us, many of the people I talk to anyway, it wasn't the Great Depression that has formed a lot of our decision-making. It's been the Great Recession, especially when it comes to investing. We're going to talk about the bull market that we're in the Hot Topic segment, something that should be pretty exciting. We're seeing our accounts grow, and it's always nice to see the values go up month after month. But I've been having a lot of conversations lately with people a lot like you, clients and listeners, that are freaked out because we, I think, are hardwired right now to assume that next Great Recession is just around the corner. This market is going to crash at any moment. And so it zaps all the joy from the growth that we've had over the last 10 or so years. But it also poisons our decision-making on allocating assets to work for us because we just think this isn't going to last, and we're not just going to have a correction. It's going to be a crash or a bear market like we experienced in 2008. I think we're anchored to that a lot, just like I would imagine my grandmother and her generation were anchored to the Great Depression when even in the 50s things got, prosperous. They thought it was always just around the corner. Now there's some value to decision making like that, right? Because you touch a fire, you learn not to touch it again, but there's also a big disadvantage in that it can trap you to not making reasoned decisions to work towards what you want. So we're going to talk a little bit about that along with the bull market in the Hot Topic segment. And in future episodes, we're going to dive into some of this behavioral aspect of investing and making good investment decisions based on our experiences. But before we do any of that, we need to get to the disclaimer. It's time for that all-important disclaimer. And this is an easy, totally rational decision for you to make. And that decision is not to take advice from me, at least on this show. I don't know you, you don't know me, and I can't give advice to anyone that I don't work for as a fiduciary. It just wouldn't make sense. So the smart thing to do is talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor, and to consider this as helpful hints in education. Now let's go talk about that bull market. Well, in the news today, CNBC reported that we are now in the second longest bull market in the S&P 500 in history. So the way that it's defined is this is the second oldest on record, meaning a period of time where there hasn't been a 20% drop in the S&P 500 index. Indeed, we've barely had 10% drops in the S&P 500 index since the market low of my son's birthday, March 9th, 2009. That's super exciting if you've been invested because you've definitely recovered a lot and gained from the Great Recession. But it's also really scary because many of us are anchored to the Great Recession and we never want to go through that again. I know I don't. I remember it was a stressful time. Obviously, I had my own assets invested, but I also had clients that I was guiding through it. Many of them already retired or about to make the decision to retire when things started to fall apart. In hindsight, in my own self-evaluation of that period, I think we did really well at preserving assets and helping keep people on track from a retirement standpoint. Probably where I would give myself the most self-criticism, in hindsight, not at the time, was being slow to participate in, after the bottom, my son's birthday, in moving up. I give in hindsight, it would have been right to be right everywhere. But my charge with clients is typically, we're not trying to get the best returns. We're trying to stay on a glide path to making sure their life isn't disrupted in any major way, which is a very different benchmark than like an investment manager who wants to outperform the markets. My benchmark is, no, can we reach this lifestyle that we've defined? And as we have to make tweaks because of something happening, we make small tweaks so we can make sure we're staying on path, which is a very different benchmark. But anyway, it was a stressful time and it influenced anybody in the industry and definitely any investor. So here we are at the end or in the middle of the second longest bear market in history, and it's scary. Turn on the news especially, there's plenty of people to tell you this makes no sense, and there's plenty of information that the markets are about to implode. And what made me think about this and want to talk about this was obviously news. We're in the second longest ever bear market. Boom. But also, I've had a few conversations with clients and with listeners, and many of them have started to express, hey man, I've been reading this over here and it says this thing is crossing this thing and we're just about to have it implode. And I've been reading this guy over here and this gal over there, and they say based on this indicator and that indicator and how they're moving right now, we can't go through that again. And everybody's saying it's about to collapse. That's scary. And there's plenty of newsletters, forecasters, chartists, people that have quote unquote cracked the code of reading what's going to happen in the future that are sounding alarm bells nonstop. Of course, they've been doing that for 10 years, and I'm not questioning the analysis of their indicators. What I would say though, because these are really smart people, a lot of them. What I would say though, any of these indicators, none of them, to my knowledge, have ever been proven enough to have any significant confidence that you can actually make decisions on them. I mean, we're talking about things like the death cross, which is one that comes up in the paper. We just crossed the death cross and it's never been wrong. It's been wrong many times. Long-term moving averages are rolling over. Technical support levels have been broken. The number of 52-week highs has begun to decline. These are all things that people watch and analyze to the nth degree. The NYSE advanced decline average is declining. We have rising interest rates now. This is what's happened in the past with rising interest rates. The PE ratio is way overvalued. And the funny thing about the PE ratio is that's price over earnings. All depends on what the earnings estimate is that you use. And everybody has their own. And they all say when they back test it, it's always been right. Yet, as Warren Buffett says, the only value of stock forecasters is to make fortune tellers look good. That is probably the only thing that we can say has enough validity to be of value in making a good decision when it comes to how to be allocated. Now, am I saying not to pay attention to signs? No, and we've talked about that in other episodes, and we will again. What I'm saying is making extreme decisions based on a lot of emotional anchoring to the Great Recession and consuming these forecasters is probably not a reasonable way to make investment decisions when you're trying to create the best life you can in retirement. So what do you do? Now, before I get to what do you do, I want to go back real quick. So we're anchored to the Great Recession, many of us, on, we're 50, we're 60, we're 65. We can't go through that again. We can't go through the Great Recession. Not like we did last time. And I'm going to say we're right on that in many cases. We can't. Not to the extent that we did before, meaning how you're allocated and the kind of losses you likely had. We're anchored to that. And the people that are tracking these indicators that are predictors, they're not quiet about it. I mean, Jim Rogers, a famous investor, says it's going to collapse. Mark Faber, the author of the newsletter Gloom, Boom, and Doom, says asset holders will lose 50%. These people, very smart people, and I don't deny that they have conviction, are very loud and they're very extreme on what they think is going to happen. And they play right in to where we're anchored, especially as we're about to enter retirement. Okay, so now what do we do to be reasonable and make prudent decisions for your family within this whole context? I see 4 or 5 things that we can focus on here and that we try to help clients focus on. Number 1, don't focus on what you can't predict. It's easy to say, hard to do. Don't focus on forecasters and making all your decisions based on what somebody's spouting off is going to happen in the future. Use the data that we have to make the most informed decision. And we've had a whole series on investing back in July. So that means number 2, rather than focusing on what you can't predict, focus on what you can control. So that's going to be what? Goals. What kind of lifestyle you're leading, and quantifying what your needs, wants, and wishes are so you know where the levers are that you can adjust as life unfolds. Focus on your cash flow, what monies you have coming in, and that could be pension, Social Security, part-time income, dividend income, what you're withdrawing from your portfolio, plus your spending, and look for the risks and opportunities in both areas so you can decide whether you need to take action on taking advantage of an opportunity or mitigating a risk. Focus on your balance sheet, your net worth statement, and think of your asset allocation in terms of your investing based on your balance sheet, not just your investment portfolio. So what do I mean by that? Well, in our agile retirement management process, we go through lots of little conversations. We're always going back to the net worth statement. So if you think of your allocation of your balance sheet, not just your portfolio, do you have enough cash reserves to cover your expected outflows for the next year or two, especially if you're retired? If your work income is really shut off, do you have 1 to 2 years cash reserves to cover the cash flow you're going to need? Many of us don't, because what does cash pay right now? It pays like 0. I'm not getting any return. In fact, I'm losing money over inflation. I get that. The return on cash reserves isn't in the interest. It's in the flexibility for when life hits the fan. It gives you flexibility. It's that financial airbag of life. So your financial face doesn't go through the windshield. Then do you have cash reserves for those bigger upcoming expenses beyond what you need? So if you know you're going to have to pay tuition, or you know you're going to buy that boat in 6 months, better to have that cash on board now. And we go through these kinds of checklists over and over and over again. After you hit those 2, from an allocation standpoint, have you reduced the debt, especially the bad debt, meaning car payments and credit cards and things like that? Because not only is there an interest expense, but it also lessens your flexibility, right? Because you got to make those payments. So if we go through another Great Recession, those payments don't stop. You have to make them. So even with low interest rates, one nice thing about not having debt is you don't have that monthly payment, which means your cash flow position is much improved. You have a lot more flexibility because you don't have this fixed overhead of these payments. And then once you got that taken care of, okay, what's the allocation of your taxable assets, the monies that you've already paid taxes on? Because that's probably the next tripwire of monies you'll access either now or in retirement. What's the allocation of that? And then what's the allocation of your tax-deferred assets? Because that's probably the next tripwire that you're going to access. And then lastly, what's the allocation of your tax-free assets, the Roth stuff and things like that? Because that's the last tripwire. Each one of those has its own particular investment time frame, going from shortest to longest. Doesn't mean you have to manage them separately, but it should inform that decision making. Now let's talk specifically about investment allocation. So what do we do? What can we do that's actionable without having to make big predictions on the future? Well, number 1, we can target the investment risk we're taking, not based on the best practice in the industry of our risk tolerance. And we've talked about that before. That's you take the questionnaire, it says you can tolerate this much risk, so here's the portfolio that will hopefully maximize returns for that level of risk. That is how almost all financial advisors determine what your asset allocation is. And the logic is, it comes from all the financial theory, if you say you can tolerate this level of risk, we want to maximize the potential returns. The problem is, especially as you get closer and into retirement, it's not about maximizing returns for your risk tolerance. because it's about maximizing your life, right? You've worked hard and saved all this money. Now you want it to work for you. You want it to help support that lifestyle. It's a very big, different thing. And you may not need to take as much risk as your quote-unquote risk tolerance says you do to position you to achieve the life that you want, meaning those goals, those needs, wants, and wishes from a cash flow perspective. It's a big disconnect that I don't really hear a lot of people talking about. Just because you can tolerate a lot more investment risk from a questionnaire standpoint doesn't mean you need to take the risk from a volatility standpoint to achieve the life you want. I find that many times, which means we want to target just enough investment risk, and risk being defined as volatility here, right? Ups and downs. We want to take just enough investment risk to give us confidence we can reach our lifestyle goals. Minimum effective dose. It's important to know what that number is, and then you can actively decide to take more. So I think that's one thing we can do in our investment portfolios is stop focusing on risk tolerance, because that's just a financial model, and we are not computers. We are humans that want to live a life. Number two is we can be passive. We can have a fixed portfolio that's smartly built, that has low costs, low turnover, and is targeting that risk. But because of our compressed retirement timeframes, meaning we don't have the long term for the averages to work out, I think it's important that we have a flexible part of our portfolio as well that is attuned to long-term valuations to try to mitigate risk. So I think passive-like investments where we have a fixed allocation is important, but I think we want some flexibility there that's focused on leaning away from over and undervalued assets and also increasing the income that's thrown off by the portfolio. So really what it comes down to is from an investment standpoint, we want to focus on achieving our goals, not timing the markets or getting the best returns. Now, next up, we are going to bring on Nichole to answer some of your questions in the practical planning segment. All right, we're back to the practical planning segment, which means I get to invite on my awesome sidekick, Nichole. Hey, Nichole.
Hey, Roger.
Now, you guys may not know this, but Nichole and I, like last month, I was working with a vocal coach because I want to be better for you and turn off radio voice, as she says. And so I thought it would be a great idea since Nichole has, although she's been in theater, has never podcasted, if she's going to be on the show with us to work with a vocal coach. So how is that going, Nichole?
It's really weird. But hi, Tracy, by the way, if you're listening this week.
That's right. Tracy is our vocal coach that is helping us.
So a lot of the exercises that I have to do, I think they're different than what you did, but she's trying to get me to pull my pitch down. So I have to talk like the teachers and Charlie Brown did.
So yeah. Yeah. So say hello, everyone, in your teacher voice.
Hello, everyone.
So every day, what Tracy does is this little inside baseball. So we're just taking a second here. So Nichole has, like, you have these sheets that she sends you to do these exercises because I had the same thing, right? Uh-huh. For me, mine was slowing down, and then I had to find quiet spots to bring in all five, I think it's 5 factors of voice.
Yes.
Tracy, don't be mad at me if I can't name them all right here. But anyway, so we're doing some. So if Nichole sounds lower in tone,
lower pitched. That's right. I'm working on my pitch.
It's because we're trying to be better for you. But anyway, some inside baseball. But now we have some listener questions. So Nichole, what do we got up today?
So our first question today is from Brendan, and it's a question on self-employed retirement accounts. He writes in and he describes a little bit about himself. He's self-employed. He's always been self-employed, and his retirement accounts are traditional IRA and Roth IRA accounts.
Now, before we get to his question, what do we really love about Brendan? Come on, you know already.
Is this a trick question? What do we really love about Brendan? Do you know Brendan?
I have no clue who he is. We've never talked, but he has a podcast I saw. But what is the podcast about?
His podcast, oh, that's right. His podcast is about home brewing
and
coffee.
I like both.
Which I love coffee. I don't know anything about home brewing, but maybe we should check it out.
I'm surprised you don't, because you guys may not know this, but Nichole's husband, he's an interesting character. The other day, actually a month or so ago, he made a corncob pipe just to see if he could do it.
Yes, and he made our dining room table. And he has also made wine at home before. It's been a while.
Yeah, so I'm surprised he hasn't homebrewed before.
That he's never made beer. But
Okay,
yeah,
well, we'll work on
just
that.
wine.
That'll be his Christmas gift as a kit.
We'll have him check out this podcast from Brendan.
Yeah, exactly.
But back to the question, Roger.
Sorry.
Brendan wants to know if he should start a company 401k plan. And if he does that, do they set it up for traditional or Roth contributions? Can employees do different things than the employer does? And if he maxes out his 401k as an employee, what's the max that the company could then contribute? So this is kind of a multi-pronged question here.
Yeah, so let's just talk about the basics of 401k, Brendan. And first off, I don't know what you should do. So let's get that out of the way because I don't give advice on the show. But let's just talk about 401ks. So for a while, I taught employer benefits portion of the Certified Financial Planner program. And man, qualified plans like a 401k can be really complicated. So let's just go through some basics. So you're a small company, you're self-employed, you're an S Corp, and you have two owners, it sounds like. I'm going to assume that the two owners are not related, meaning you're not husband and wife, husband. So you can't have a individual 401k, which is a special carve out for one employer or employer and spouse 401ks. So typically what a small company will do if they're going to do a 401k, we'll just stick with that because they have simple IRAs and things like that, is they do what's called a safe harbor 401k. Because 401ks is governed by ERISA and the Department of Justice. And it sounds intimidating, and it is when you're dealing with retirement plans. There are a lot of rules, a lot of testing that you have to do with a normal 401k. But for small employers, they have this safe harbor 401k that gives you a carve out that you get to avoid almost all of the testing that an employer has to do. So here are the basics. If you set up a safe harbor 401k, an employee that's under 50 can contribute $18,000 a year. So that's what they can contribute just as an employee, just like you would if you worked for a company. If they're over 50, they get to do an extra $6,000. So that would include you as the owner of the company and your partner. You guys could choose individually how much you wanted to contribute. And then you'd have your own account. And based on what provider you chose, you could have different investment selections and manage those independently. So you can do whatever you want with it. Now, I'm trying to think. I believe with a safe harbor, you can set up a Roth contribution. So that what that means is normally a 401k, when you're making a contribution, you're doing what? It's pre-tax dollars. It's money that goes in before taxes. A Roth contribution just means you pay taxes on it, but then it goes in and then it's never taxed even when you take it out. Have you ever contributed to 401k, Nichole?
Yes, I have.
You have? Okay. Was it Roth or was it pre-tax? Do you remember?
It was pre-tax.
Okay.
I didn't have the option for a Roth.
Yeah, and that's a newer option. And which one you choose really is dependent on your individual situation. And we can get into that maybe in another segment. But as an employer, and this is the cool thing about 401ks, if you own the company, is that you can also put on, Brendan, a profit sharing portion. So, well, let me back up a second. So we have the employee can put in up to $18,000. Now,
and is that combined across Roth and pre-tax?
Yes.
That $18,000?
Yeah, okay. That's combined across that. Now, in order to get out of all the testing that ERISA and the Department of Justice wants you to do, a safe harbor 401k says that the employer in a safe harbor 401k has to do a dollar for dollar match. Typically, it's up to 4% of the employee's income. So what that means is if an employee puts in $1, you as the employer have to put in $1, but you only have to do it until you hit whatever is 4% of that employee's income. So for example, let's say you have an employee and they make $50,000 a year. So they can put in up to $18,000, but you have to match dollar for dollar up to $2,000 of their contributions. So if they put in $5,000, the employee, as the employer, your obligation, and this is not discretionary, you got to do it, would be to contribute $2,000 to their 401k. So that's going to be your requirement under a safe harbor 401k. And then now we can get to the profit sharing. That's where you have a lot of power to defer a lot of money, which is in a 401k plan like this, all the combined contributions, you have your employee contributions, right? That's what the employee puts in. And then you got the match, which is your obligation to the employee. And then if you decide to, Brendan, if your cash flow is really good and the beer and the coffee is flowing, then you can add on what's called a profit sharing, which is totally discretionary, which means 1 year you can do it, and then the next year you can decide not to do it. And you can contribute as much as $54,000 total, say for yourself, because you likely have the highest income in the company. So that's combined. So that's including the employee contributions of $18,000, and then it's the employer match, which gets you to whatever that number is. So a total of money that's allowed to go into this is up to $54,000. So that's a lot of money you can defer into a retirement account. Now, if you do a profit sharing for yourself and you have employees, you'll have some obligations based on certain restrictions to do it for employees too. But here's the cool thing about that. Now, your employer match, now I'm geeking out a little bit here, aren't I, Nichole? It's a geeky subject, right? Your employer match is 100% vested to the employee. So if you give that guy that $2,000 match, that's their money. You can't get it back even if they quit tomorrow. But with the profit sharing, you can put a vesting schedule on that. So you could have it vest typically over 6 years. So you'd say it was a $10,000 profit sharing you gave to that employee. Well, it's not really their money. Over 6 years, they earn 20% of it, meaning that if they left the company, they only get what they vested. So that gives you some protection and it creates more loyalty, right? Sort of a golden handcuff for an employee. And obviously for yourself, you're always going to be there because you own it. And then if they leave, that unvested portion, you can have redistributed to the people remaining in the company, which could be you because you own it. So I would consider looking at a safe harbor 401k, and they're pretty inexpensive to have set up and managed. In fact, I'm setting one up right now for a small business owner, and I think the cost to set it up from the administrative standpoint is like $600. You probably want to use what's called a plan administrator to handle all the legal stuff. So hopefully that gives you some framework, Brendan, and Google Safe Harbor 401k or reach out and we can explain it to you and keep the beer flowing.
And for anyone who's interested, I'll throw a link to Brendan's podcast and 6 Shot Saturday.
You know what's going to happen there, Nichole?
What?
Tracy, our vocal coach, is going to email me and she's going to tell me I got into teacher mode.
Does that mean I'll be off the hook? Because that's totally fine.
You're right. Roger's going to get a red card. All right, what do we got up next?
Our next question is from Sharon, and her question is on long-term care.
Ooh, hard one.
So Sharon is 55, and she's got a 4-year-old long-term care policy. Premiums are going up. So she's trying to decide what to do as far as if she should pay the increased premium, if she should lower her coverage so that the premium stays the same, but her benefits are reduced, or should she consider self-insuring? So thoughts on that, Roger?
Wow, Sharon, that's a really good question. And in fact, right now, Nichole, you may not know this, I'm trying to get, in fact, did we email him the calendar link? We're trying to get on the chairman of the long-term care organization, who's the expert on this subject. He and I traded some emails, and I think we were going to send him a link. So
I've sent him an email. I'm not sure if he's scheduled anything yet.
Okay, well, let's follow up with him because we need to answer this question or get some more expert advice because this is a really niche area. Well, honestly, that I don't have any great answers to because a lot of people are dealing with what you're dealing with right now, Sharon, in that rates have been rising. It depends on the vintage of the policy, especially a lot of the older policies that were more robust than current policies. They've really seen rate hikes. As an example, in Florida recently, MetLife is proposing a long-term care insurance hike of 20 to 95%. Depending on the vintage of the policy.
That is a huge difference.
That means they definitely mispriced some probably very old policies because they didn't really understand the claims experience that they were going to have. Now, Unum, another major long-term care insurance company, is proposing increases of up to 114% on some older policies. Now, these are pending Florida. All these things have to be approved by each state's insurance regulator. And then 4 carriers, Genworth, MetLife, John Hancock, and Unum, are all proposing and getting approval for double-digit rate increases on older policies in Pennsylvania. And I can go on and on about this. The point is, a lot of these policies are getting repriced, and these insurers are saying, man, we made it too good of a deal, and we're experiencing this claims history coming down the pike, and we realized we had our estimates wrong and what it was going to look like. And that sucks for us, because when we buy a policy, the idea is, okay, we bought a policy, now we got that taken care of. What a lot of us fail to realize is they can change the prices and we can pay into these policies for years. And then when we're older, getting closer to when we might need it, they change the terms and we're faced with some really bad options. So what are the options that you have? Well, one, you can buck up and pay the premium, which is just going to decrease your flexibility in your cash flow. Another option is you can lower your benefits. So let's say your premium is at X. You can talk to the company or your agent and say, well, can I keep the same premium because I can't pay anymore? Can I lower my benefits to keep the same premium? Which helps you on the cash flow end. But then if you need the policy, you're going to be less insured. That's not a great option either. Third is you can just drop the policy, which is what you talked about, self-insuring. Or you can go look out for new policies that may not be as robust as the one that you have, because they're changing the numbers. And I think you just got to go through with someone understanding your financial situation, all four of those options, because you could maybe combine a couple of those. And I've gone through this process with a number of clients, and it always ends up being in a context of what their net worth is, what their age is, what their other cash flows are. In some instances, we've looked at some of these older policies, and it's like, wow, you don't want to lose that policy because the benefits are so strong. And if the cash flow is available, or if assets are available to continue to buck up and fund it, then we've made that choice. In other instances, it's been the exact opposite of lowering the benefits or just looking for new policies. When we have him on, we're going to talk about some of the newer concepts that are more asset-based, or where there's like a 10-pay option where you can know what your cost is for the insurance. Because that's sort of the problem here, Sharon, is that, okay, if you buck up and you start to pay the extra premiums, now you're like, is it going to happen again? We don't have the visibility on what our financial liability is in terms of covering just the premiums. And we're just insuring for something that is a possibility, not necessarily a likelihood. And that's hard. And because that affects your lifestyle. So we're going to try to get him on the show and dive deeper into this subject. Because I'll be frank, I don't have a great solution. In my opinion, and I'll talk about this if we get this gentleman on the show, is I don't think these insurers have any clue what they're going to experience, because we're now just having the baby boomers starting to enter the period when, think of a snake. It's that big bulge in the snake that is just now entering. Nichole looked at me and said that was a horrible analogy.
Well, I mean, maybe you should specify it's like a snake that swallowed an egg or something. I mean, I don't know.
Okay, a snake that swallowed an egg, that's the insurance company. And that egg is this huge number of baby boomers that are going to start tapping these policies for claims because they need them for long-term care or assisted living and things like that. And they're going to adjust how they price based on the claims experience that they're getting. And I think what happened was, now it's sort of that thing where, 10 years off, we might have this experience, so we'll price it at this. And then when that experience comes and it's a lot bigger than you thought, you're like, wow, I really didn't price that very well. I need to raise my prices. That's sort of how I see what the long-term care industry is going through right now. So hopefully we'll get this guy on the show. Hopefully that gave you a framework to start thinking about it, Sharon, so you can make a decision that's right for you.
So our last question for this episode is a question that's sort of a follow-up to some of the things that we were talking about with the Equifax data breach a few weeks ago. We've had some people approaching us wanting to know if title lock insurance is worth it. They've seen some of those ads that talk about scary things like your house getting stolen, and they're wanting to know if that's something they need to protect.
Wow, your house getting stolen. Yeah, we've had a few questions on that from clients, as well as I've seen the ads too. And they're scary, right? They're designed that way. So at first, okay, why would you need to lock your title of your house or whatever property it is? Well, the idea is, and I'm not an expert in this area for sure, but the idea is that people can file on your title, whether it's a lien or do something that borrow against your house without you realizing it through identity theft. And then ultimately you lose your house in some way. So the concept of this title lock is, and I went and researched it because I got a few questions from clients, and I haven't talked to anybody in this industry, so I'm qualifying here because I'm learning about this as well. But after reviewing these title lock offerings, they talk about putting this barrier around your title and things like that. But my understanding is that it's really not insurance and that, that they're going to go take care of it. It's really a monitoring service. You put it into place and they're going to monitor based on the databases they have access to filings against your titles on whatever your property is, and then they'll send you an email whenever they see something titled. That is basically the extent of what I think these services are. They're happy to email me and correct me, but that from reading them and researching a little bit and Googling it, whether it's and doing some research on it, which is Googling, right? Doing research on it and talking to some colleagues, it seems to be a little bit of a fringe industry. You know, there are some articles, there's one, I think from the Wall Street Journal, they're dated, they're 4 to 5 years old. And I think some of this happened in '08 period of FBI, and it's a rising concern, but I haven't found any information on how prevalent this is. It seems to be a little bit of a fringe industry, and there's little indication that the threat is more than that, at least anything that I could find.
Sounds like one of those offers you get in the mail where they offer to fill out your homestead exemption for you, but you're perfectly capable of doing it yourself.
Well, exactly. I mean, my thought was just review it annually. You know, you can review any filings on your titles annually, which is a real simple alternative to paying somebody to send you emails that you'll probably delete or go to your spam filter anyway.
So if something happens and there is a filing on your title, do these companies do anything to help you take action steps to take care of it?
Not that I could
That might
see.
be worth the money, but
Yeah, that might be worth. And there's some like LifeLock type of things that say they do that, right? They give you some protection. I didn't read any of that in the literature of the firms that I looked at. To me, it looked like it was basically a monitoring service where if something happened, they sent you an email.
gotcha.
And it only costs, the ones I looked at cost about $10 a month, which seems minimal, right? And we're in that, in general, in the world, we're in that subscription model. Well, it's just $10 a month. And then it's just $10 a month. And those things add up. So from a marketing perspective, I was like, okay, we're going to monitor and send you emails, and it's only $10 a month. But you can check your title, and you know, for $10 a month, yeah, it seems not expensive, but those things add up, and you could probably take care of it most of on your own in an annual review. So maybe we add that to the retirement standard of care. I don't know. So hopefully that answers your question.
That's all I got for questions.
That's all. That's all we got. All right.
That's it. Yeah.
All right. Well, then you know what we need to do. We need to figure out what our smart sprint is.
Are we skipping the happy lab?
No, let's get happy first. Good point.
Happy. Yeah.
Let's get happy. Hey, well, welcome to the Happy Lab, where we're going to noodle on how to be a little happier. Now, Nichole, you have a hole in your ceiling.
I do. I came home from out of town and I got ready to put my running shoes on to take my kids to school, and they were soaking wet.
So you had a leak in your air conditioning unit of some sort, and now you have your in-laws in your house now helping fix it. Father-in-law's fixing the hole.
I do. My in-laws are amazing, and when I sent the picture of the board that's falling out of my ceiling, essentially, my awesome father and mother-in-law drove over, and they're helping us cut it all out and fix it today.
So why is this in the Happy Lab? Well, we're talking about in-laws. Like my in-laws live like a mile away from me. That's close for in-laws.
It is close.
And as I was talking to Nichole and we were preparing for this show, I could hear her talking to her mother-in-law who's cleaning. And Nicole's like, no, don't clean my house. You don't need to do that. But that's sort of what in-laws do, right? Or even family. They help you out, right?
They're helping us big time.
Yeah. And so whenever my wife and I go out of town, because her parents are so close, usually one of them, usually the mother, watches our house and the dogs and everything else. And when we come home, the house is immaculate. I think all she does is putz around and clean the house all day. And it can be really uncomfortable because I have a rule. There's one rule, and this happened once. Mother-in-laws should not fold my underwear. That's just not something that should happen. But the point of being a Happy Lab is, especially as we get older, it's great to live around family. They can be, they can fold your underwear every now and then, but it's great to have them as a support network so you can live a happier life. That's a good one, right?
That's a great one for me.
On your marks, get set.
Hey, welcome to the Smart Sprint segment where we set a 7-day goal to take a little tiny baby step to
something very small.
create a great life. So let's talk about the title lock thing. Since that's out there and we're all worried about theft of sorts because of Equifax, in the next 7 days, go check your title to see if anything's been filed. The simple way to do that is to visit the county assessor, who manages all that stuff. And many states have tools that are available for free just to search your title to see if there's anything been filed. See, you can do it for free, and states have free tools to do it. So in the next 7 days, if that's something that's a worry to you, why don't you go take care of that? So we do have some exciting news before we leave. One is we have chosen and contacted the subject for Retirement Plan Live, which is the live case study.
Woo!
Where we're going to walk through creating a retirement roadmap with a listener, someone like you, and you're going to get to listen in. So this person is really stepping up. We're going to have the conversations of defining their ideal retirement, looking at their resources and what they're worried about and what they're excited about, and you're going to get to listen in, and it's all going to be real, and then we're going to have a webinar where we get to actually look at the analysis together, meaning you get to look at the analysis too. Now, the only way you're going to get access to this is if you are receiving 6-Shot Saturday. So, Nichole, how can someone get 6-Shot Saturday so they can watch step by step and get all the documents and access to the webinar?
Go to rogerwhitney.com and click on sign up for 6-Shot Saturday.
And that's right out.
As of today, hopefully there's going to be a new link to it on the bottom of the homepage. So.
Oh, you're doing that, aren't you? Awesome. Thank you.
I'm working hard. So if you are interested in talking to us more about your individual retirement, you can also click on Work with Roger on the website and send us an email, and I will get back with you, and we'll get some time for you and Roger to chat.
Until next week, I am the Retirement Answer Man, and you are Nichole,
the trusty sidekick.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.
So you don't have any mold, right?
I don't know. I mean, you'd see that, right?
I would assume you'd see that. It'd be
It smells suspicious in there, but I'm hoping it's just a wet carpet.
Yeah, so you have to pull up and get that. You might have to get a new pad, and such a horrible thing.
Just what I wanted to do when I got back from out of town.
Yeah, and you're not very good with like stress and things coming at you out of rounds. Is that correct?
Maybe a little, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're a perfectionist, right? That's part of you want things.
I'm a recovering perfectionist. I'm trying not to be one.
That's why you're an awesome sidekick, though, right? You keep me online.
I think so.
So we haven't even shared the video of the books being delivered yet, have we? We need to figure out how we're going to do that because we have books. We have the book, Rock Retirement.
I have my own copy, and I think it's so cool.
I laughed because you put the picture of the acknowledgments on Facebook. That was funny.
And do you know how many people commented on it? Having an acknowledgement in a book is really cool. To me, anyway. I love books.
That's awesome. But we got to figure out what we're going to do with all these books with the listeners.
We for sure do, because I told them we would.
Yeah. So, yeah, we better figure that out. And it's weird because having all these books, we got to do something with them, get the message out. But the book doesn't actually get released until March, meaning that people can get secret pre-launch copies if we figure out how to do it. So let's put that into
Let's noodle on it.
Let's noodle on it. That's a good idea.